Nestled between rolling hills and quiet side roads, Elmwood Shores looked like the cover of a real estate brochure. Neatly trimmed lawns, picket fences, and a shimmering pond at the neighborhood center. The pond wasn't large, but it provided a picturesque focal point, teeming with ducks, ringed by a walking path. Families often strolled along its edge, feeding bread crumbs to the birds, snapping photos of the sunset reflected on water. Governance here rested with the Elmwood Shores Homeowners Association, HOA, an entity that posted rules for everything. How short the grass must be, which house colors were allowed, and even permissible mailbox designs. Most residents accepted these constraints, trusting the HOA to protect property values. But the strictness also meant that any creative or spontaneous project risked incurring the wrath of at least one board member. Among these local regulators, one figure stood out for her unwavering dedication to enforcement: Victoria Arnett, though everyone in private called her Karen. A middle-aged woman with a regal posture and a near-permanent scowl, Karen was not the HOA president, but acted as if she were. She patrolled daily, snapping pictures of minor violations, emailing the board incessantly to demand crackdowns. Some appreciated her vigilance for community order, but many found her approach meddlesome and punitive. In the next few weeks, though, Karen's sense of authority would clash with a group of children seeking fun on the neighborhood pond. Their homegrown raft project might seem innocent enough, but to Karen's controlling eyes, it was an affront to Elmwood Shores' carefully curated image, and one that absolutely must be stamped out. Little did she suspect that her sabotage would inadvertently prompt an even grander improvement, unifying the entire neighborhood against her negativity. In late spring, a band of neighborhood children conceived a thrilling idea: building a small raft to float on the pond. They'd glimpsed a YouTube video of kids crafting a raft from wood pallets and empty plastic containers for buoyancy. The group, led by best friends Ethan, age 12, and Rosie, age 11, decided they could replicate something similar. Their plan was simple: gather scrap wood, lash empty soda bottles or jugs to provide flotation, and attach a small wooden platform on top. They'd then paddle around the shallow edges of the pond, each wearing old life jackets, practicing their sailing. When Ethan pitched the idea to his father, Mr. Lewis, the father was hesitant, concerned about safety. But after verifying the pond was shallow near the bank, he agreed to help supervise. Rosie's mother contributed her old kayak paddle. The children set up a little shipyard in Ethan's driveway, hammering wooden boards, painting them bright colors, and carefully fastening empty jugs. Over a few weekends, the raft took shape. Soon, the kids proudly tested its buoyancy in a small kiddie pool. It bobbed merrily, supporting their combined weight. Word spread among other kids. Some joked that Ethan and Rosie would become pond pirates. The crafters planned to keep their raft tethered near the pond's edge, removing it after each day's use, to avoid leaving clutter. The general vibe was excitement, except for Karen, who'd glimpsed the children's activity. She found the raft concept distasteful, calling it an eyesore and a liability risk. She made snide remarks to Mr. Lewis about unauthorized watercraft. He politely said the kids would keep it safe and tidy, not violating any known HOA rule. Karen grumbled, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. Meanwhile, the children finished painting the raft's deck in sunny yellow. They scrounged old foam pieces for extra buoyancy. The big day soon approached, the raft's maiden voyage on Elmwood Shores Pond. Unknown to them, Karen already planned to sabotage their watery dreams, convinced the homemade craft clashed with the pristine neighborhood aesthetic. On a bright Saturday morning, Ethan, Rosie, and a few friends rolled the wooden raft on a makeshift cart down to the pond. They wore colorful life vests donated by a neighbor. Mr. Lewis and two other parents stood by, prepared to watch from the shore in case of trouble. Nervous excitement rippled through the children. Birds flitted around, the pond's surface calm and inviting. With Mr. Lewis's help, they slid the raft into the water. It bobbed steadily, exactly as tested. Ethan climbed aboard first, carefully balancing. Rosie joined him, wide-eyed with glee. They paddled with a small wooden oar, drifting a few feet from the bank, squealing in delight. The watchers cheered softly, snapping photos of the kids' success. The raft seemed stable for short distances, well suited to the calm pond. But a sudden hush fell. Karen appeared, arms crossed, wearing a tense expression. She marched toward Mr. Lewis. "I hope you've got an official permit for that," she said icily. Mr. Lewis calmly responded that no such permit was required for a small, personally built raft used under parental supervision. Karen insisted it was unsafe and unsightly, threatening to raise the matter with the HOA. "We don't allow random boats in our pond," she declared. Mr. Lewis politely retorted that the pond was a common area, with no posted rule forbidding small crafts. Furious, Karen barked that she'd see about new regulations. Despite her glare, the children continued to enjoy their short paddles, never drifting far. They later hauled the raft back to the bank, securing it with a rope around a small tree. Karen stalked off, muttering about neighborhood standard violations. The parents shook their heads at her negativity. The day ended with the kids beaming, their dream afloat despite Karen's hostility. Yet behind Karen's scowl lay a determination to end this scruffy eyesore. If the board wouldn't ban it swiftly, she might resort to direct sabotage. She believed her sense of order justified anything. The children, unaware, happily planned future voyages, not suspecting the lengths Karen would go to sink their craft, literally. A few evenings later, the kids moored their raft in the same spot near the pond's edge, intending to use it again the next morning. Mr. Lewis had a family gathering that night, so they left the raft locked to a small wooden post hammered into the bank. They never dreamed it might be in danger. That night, with the moon half hidden by clouds, Karen snuck out. She wore dark clothing and carried a small toolkit, including a sharp awl. Approaching the pond, she paused to check if anyone was around. The communal park lights cast faint glows on the water, but the area was otherwise deserted. She crept to the raft. Her plan? Puncture the plastic flotation containers or slash crucial beams, making the craft unseaworthy. She found the plastic jugs attached beneath the wooden deck. With the awl, she jabbed holes in multiple containers, letting air hiss out. She twisted the awl deeper, ensuring water would seep in once the raft was afloat. She then used wire cutters to sever some key lashings holding the structure's foam blocks in place. For good measure, she pried loose a few nails in the wooden frame. Satisfied, she quietly retreated, certain that any attempt to use the raft next would result in its sinking. A wave of twisted triumph filled her. She believed she was saving the neighborhood from a dangerous, unsightly contraption. At dawn, unsuspecting dog walkers passed by, noticing the raft still moored, but no obvious sign of damage from the outside. Karen, from behind her curtains, smirked. She anticipated the children's heartbreak. She alone, she believed, enforced decency. Yet ironically, her sabotage would soon mobilize the entire community to create an official, even more prominent presence by the water, something far bigger and more permanent than a homemade raft. Morning light broke over Elmwood shores, and Ethan and Rosie sprinted to the pond, eager for another day on their beloved raft. Mr. Lewis followed at a more measured pace, coffee in hand. Spotting them from the distance, he guessed they'd slip out on the water before lunchtime. A few other kids ambled over, curious to join. With enthusiastic grins, Ethan and Rosie untied the rope. The raft looked intact from above. They pushed it into the water. But soon as it floated out, it began to tilt oddly. Water rushed into the hollow jugs that Karen had punctured. The raft's homemade foam blocks shifted, since their fastenings were severed. Within moments, the craft lurched to one side. Rosie squealed in alarm, nearly toppling. Ethan tried to steady the platform, but it sank deeper. A wave of confusion and panic swept them. Mr. Lewis raced to the shore, calling for the kids to jump back. They scrambled off, wading in the shallows. The raft's deck dipped below the surface, air bubbles rising from the compromised jugs. Within half a minute, it was half submerged, listing heavily. Another wave splashed over the deck, and it sank almost entirely, floating just beneath the surface, bobbing uselessly. Stunned silence. The children stared in disbelief at their once proud craft, now a soggy ruin. Rosie had tears in her eyes. Ethan examined the tangle of foam blocks drifting, noticing cut wires. Someone sabotaged it, he whispered, showing his father the severed lashings. Mr. Lewis grimaced, concluding only one person was likely behind such an act. Neighbors who'd come to watch quickly realized it was no accident. They helped haul the waterlogged remains to the shore, discovering large punctures in the plastic jugs. Furious whispers flew. Karen must have done this. Word spread in minutes. By midday, the entire block buzzed with condemnation. The kids' heartbreak fueled adult anger. If Karen believed she had rid the pond of the raft, she was about to discover that her sabotage spurred an even bigger, more official replacement. By afternoon, a crowd gathered near the pond, examining the raft's damaged remains. Ethan and Rosie, face tear-streaked, stood beside Mr. Lewis, all furious yet determined not to let the saboteur triumph. Neighbors offered condolences and supportive words. Some suggested calling the police, though without direct evidence, it might be fruitless. Others demanded the HOA hold Karen accountable if it was indeed her doing. Then Ms. Gardner, a neighbor known for her involvement in local community projects, proposed a radical solution. If one small homemade raft can't survive sabotage, why not build something official, bigger, and sturdier, like a boathouse with child-safe rafts, fully sanctioned by the HOA? She reasoned that the pond was an asset, and with a designated boathouse, kids could enjoy water activities safely under adult supervision. They'd have properly constructed mini rafts or pedal boats, plus life vests. That left no room for Karen's dangerous contraption argument, nor a single point of sabotage. Enthusiasm surged at the notion. Another neighbor pointed out that the local high school's carpentry class might love a real-life project. The community could pool funds to buy materials, with the class building the boathouse as a hands-on assignment. The HOAs in many neighborhoods had installed small docks or gazebos near water, so an official boathouse wasn't far-fetched. Ms. Gardner suggested they approach the HOA board with a robust plan, a minimal cost, a safer environment for kids, and a new amenity for Elmwood Shores. Mr. Lewis, seeing how the children's heartbreak had triggered this wave of positivity, nodded. Karen wanted to kill their raft? Fine. We'll build something she can't easily destroy. Something that's 100% legitimate. The group agreed. They'd gather estimates, outline design ideas, show how supervised raft usage would actually reduce any liability concerns. The sabotage might ironically spark a bigger, official presence on the pond, overshadowing Karen's attempt to rid the waters of children's crafts once and for all. The following week, Ms. Gardner and Mr. Lewis arranged a meeting with Ms. Duval, the HOA president. They presented a preliminary proposal for constructing a kids' boathouse near the pond, a small wooden structure to store rafts, paddles, and life vests, plus a short dock for easy launching. They pitched it as both a safety measure and a new community feature. The sabotage of the kids' raft underscored the need for an official approach to water activities, ensuring no single craft was at risk, and that no malicious neighbor could undermine it. Ms. Duval found the idea intriguing but wanted details: cost, location, compliance with local codes, the design's aesthetic synergy with Elmwood Shores. The neighbors promised they'd gather a formal plan, working with the high school carpentry teacher. Ms. Duval recognized the potential for good PR, turning a negative act into a positive improvement. She agreed to bring it to the full HOA board at the next monthly session. Word spread in the neighborhood forum, generating excitement. Families posted supportive comments. Finally, a safe way for kids to enjoy the pond. The crafters who had faced sabotage in the past offered moral support, recalling how petty destruction once led them to create a better solution. Some residents worried about Karen's reaction, but most believed if the board endorsed it, Karen's hostility wouldn't prevail. The sabotage fiasco had turned public sentiment strongly against her. Meanwhile, Karen tried to stoke fear about liability. What if a child drowns? This boathouse is a huge risk. But the official plan included strict rules, adult supervision, mandatory life vests, limited hours. Ms. Duval believed that, ironically, having a dedicated boathouse would be less risky than random homemade rafts. The community was leaning that way. Soon, the board's official decision would shape whether the boathouse rose from the pond's shore or the children's dreams sank again. The next HOA board meeting drew a notable turnout. Ms. Gardner, Mr. Lewis, and a representative from the high school carpentry class arrived with sketches and budget estimates for the proposed boathouse. They envisioned a small wooden structure with a peaked roof, lockable storage for rafts, and a short dock. The cost could be partially offset by volunteer labor from the carpentry students, who'd treat it as a major class project, supervised by their teacher. The community would provide materials, possibly with local sponsors. Ms. Duval introduced the agenda item, praising the concept's intention to promote child safety after the recent sabotage. She gave the floor to Ms. Gardner, who eloquently laid out the benefits. Safety. With official rafts and life vests, children would not rely on precarious homemade crafts. Supervision. A designated schedule and adult overseers minimized liability. Community spirit. The boathouse would encourage wholesome family activities around the pond. Educational. The high school carpentry class gained real-life experience. Karen, seated among the board, openly scowled. When asked for her input, she repeated concerns about cost and unsightly structures. She claimed a boathouse might ruin the pond's natural aesthetic or encourage reckless behavior. Another board member pointed out that, ironically, the sabotage left the children with no safe craft, and the boathouse could rectify that by providing standard, regulation-compliant rafts. Ms. Gardner also noted they'd keep the design in line with the neighborhood style, neutral paint, a modest footprint. Several parents voiced excitement, volunteering to help with the build or donate. Others reaffirmed that if the sabotage taught them anything, it was that children deserved a secure place to explore the pond responsibly. After public comment, the board deliberated. Ms. Duval soon called for a vote. With minimal dissent aside from Karen's hostility, the board approved the boathouse project in principle, pending final architectural details. Cheers erupted in the meeting hall. The children's faces lit up. Ms. Gardner thanked the board, promising to finalize the design. Karen sat grim-faced, arms crossed, powerless to block the measure. The sabotage had ironically spurred a far more permanent and official solution that she, ironically, would soon have to witness daily: an official boathouse at the pond's edge. With the HOA's blessing, the boathouse committee set to work. Ms. Gardner liaised with the high school's carpentry teacher, Mr. Kramer, who was thrilled for his students to tackle a real community project. Plans began to form: a 12-foot by 16-foot wooden structure, including a front deck that extended over the water. Inside, racks for paddles, shelves for life vests, and a small space for staff or volunteers to sit. The roof would be pitched, matching the style of local houses, and painted a subdued tan to blend with the environment. Ethan and Rosie, the same kids whose raft was sunk, found themselves excited at this grand replacement. They visited the high school workshop, watching older students cut lumber and measure angles. Mr. Lewis offered to donate some building materials. Another neighbor, who owned a small hardware store, contributed nails and a discount on lumber. Local businesses pitched in funds, moved by the story of how sabotage had sparked a communal dream. Of course, Karen posted a new complaint on the neighborhood forum, warning that the boathouse might attract loud crowds or unwanted visitors. Ms. Duval assured everyone that the building would be locked after hours, with posted hours for supervised raft usage. The more Karen whined, the more neighbors recognized her obstructionism. Many posted supportive messages. Karen destroyed one raft. Now we're building a safe boathouse for many. Perfect outcome. As the design coalesced, Ms. Gardner and Mr. Kramer finalized cost estimates. The total soared beyond the children's tiny budget for the homemade raft, but with volunteer labor and donations, it remained feasible. A short walkway from the bank to the front deck would let kids easily load into rafts. The official rafts themselves would be store-bought and tested, far sturdier and safer than the old patchwork platform. The project was well on track. If all went smoothly, construction might begin in a month, with a possible midsummer opening. The entire block bristled with anticipation. One potential snag loomed: the County Water Authority had to be consulted for any structure near a pond. Ms. Gardner dutifully filed the paperwork. She explained it was a small boathouse for non-motorized watercraft only. The official responded positively: no environmental concerns if they minimized changes to the shoreline. The HOA's legal counsel also checked local codes, finding no problem with a modest building. Karen's illusions that authorities might block the boathouse fizzled. Meanwhile, the sabotage of the raft lingered in memory. Some worried Karen might sabotage the new structure. But a wooden boathouse, built by a large team, was far less vulnerable than a single homemade craft. The group planned to store official rafts inside, locked. Ms. Gardner joked that if Karen tried to sink multiple professional-grade rafts, she'd face immediate discovery. People stayed vigilant, though, remembering how easily she targeted the raft. They might install motion sensor lights or cameras around the new building to deter vandalism. In the weeks preceding construction, the high school carpentry class pre-cut some components in their workshop. Students beamed at the chance to see their efforts stand in the real world. Mr. Kramer told them about the fiasco leading to this project, how kids' joy on the pond was threatened. The students felt extra motivation to help. Meanwhile, the elderly crocheters from past sabotage experiences donated crocheted seat cushions for the future rafts. The entire community pooled talents and resources, turning a negative event into a large-scale, hopeful collaboration. Karen watched from her vantage point, overshadowed by the unstoppable momentum. She continued emailing Ms. Duval about noise from building or risk of nails left around, but Ms. Duval politely assured her all safety measures would be followed. Freed from trivial obstacles, the Boathouse initiative moved forward unimpeded. The day of actual on-site construction loomed. On a bright, mild Saturday, a volunteer crew assembled near the pond for the Boathouse's groundbreaking. The high school carpentry students arrived with a trailer of lumber and tools. Ms. Gardner directed them, referencing the final blueprint. A small crowd of neighbors looked on, including Ethan and Rosie, excited to witness the replacement for their destroyed raft. Mr. Lewis, sporting a proud grin, offered to help carry materials. Ms. Duval and a few HOA board members came, snapping photos of the first boards being laid. They hammered a small sign. Future Site, Children's Boathouse, a community project. Encouraging cheers broke out. Even a local journalist from the small-town paper stopped by, drawn by the story of sabotage turned philanthropic build. She interviewed Ms. Gardner, who described how the malicious sinking of a child's raft had inspired an official safe harbor for water fun. Karen stood at a distance, arms folded, scowling at the sign. She recognized the final shape of her fiasco. In trying to rid the pond of what she deemed an eyesore, she'd fueled the creation of a permanent structure. Realizing her lost cause, she refrained from direct sabotage. Too many watchers. She scurried off as Ms. Duval approached, ignoring attempts at conversation. For the next few hours, the volunteer team laid floor beams, post holes for the deck, and the basic frame of the boathouse. By day's end, a partial skeleton rose from the pond bank. The crafters arrived with homemade sandwiches, fueling the sweaty laborers with good cheer. Everyone sensed they were forging more than a building. They were forging a statement that no single act of cruelty would quell the neighborhood's spirit. The children went home that night thrilled, imagining the final structure they'd soon enjoy. Despite the presence of volunteers, Karen remained dogged. One night, 2 weeks into construction, when the partially completed boathouse stood unguarded, she slunk to the site. She carried a crowbar, hoping to pry loose newly installed boards or rails. If she could hamper the boathouse enough, maybe the project would run out of steam. In her mind, it was still ugly, defiling the pond. However, the neighbors had anticipated sabotage. They installed battery-powered security cameras on a pole, disguised as a birdhouse. Also, Ms. Gardner set a motion sensor floodlight that clicked on if someone approached after dusk. Karen, creeping near the structure, triggered the light. Startled, she saw the camera's faint blinking. Panicking, she retreated, tossing the crowbar into the grass. She recognized if she proceeded, she'd be filmed committing vandalism. The notion of possible criminal charges or public shame outweighed her zeal. She fled into the night, seething that the community had outsmarted her. The next morning, Mr. Kramer's students found an abandoned crowbar near the boathouse. Reviewing the camera footage, they glimpsed a shadowy figure scurry away. While the resolution was too poor for a clear ID, they strongly suspected Karen. Outraged neighbors demanded Ms. Duval confront her. Ms. Duval's plan: keep the footage on file, and if the sabotage continued, they'd show it to the police. For now, Karen had inflicted no damage. The near incident only strengthened the volunteers' resolve. They hammered more nails, securing beams with extra bracing. Ms. Gardner purchased better locks for the supply shed. Karen's moment of sabotage had ended in a humiliating retreat. The unstoppable boathouse soared toward completion, each new plank defying her hostility. Within another week, the boathouse's walls rose, the roof framed out. The carpentry students hammered siding into place, painting it a soft tan to blend with the environment. A front overhang sheltered the deck from rain. Inside, The space was partitioned into two sections, a small caretaker's corner and the main storage area for rafts, paddles, and life jackets. A short walkway led to a simple wooden dock that extended a few feet over the water, ensuring easy launch. Mr. Kramer oversaw every detail, proud of his students' diligence. Ethan and Rosie visited daily, marveling at how grand it was compared to their original raft. They teased that their shipyard had grown into a full boathouse. Some older neighbors, including Ms. Green from the Crafters, promised to help oversee kid boat time once the facility opened. The plan was to stock a small fleet of child-friendly rafts or pedal boats, safer than the homemade contraption, all stored under lock and key. No single saboteur could sink them all. The pond, once the scene of quiet strolls, would become a modest center of water fun. Karen, seeing the building near finalization, ranted on the forum that it was twice as large as necessary, overshadowing the pond. But her complaints gained no traction. People praised the aesthetic and pointed out that no bylaw was violated. If anything, the building was quite tasteful. Ms. Duval publicly commended the volunteers at a mini-ceremony, awarding the carpentry class gift certificates from local businesses. The sabotage, though once threatening to snuff out kids' pond activities, had ironically birthed a major new amenity for all. At last, the finishing touches arrived. The boathouse door, painted a deeper tan, with a decorative anchor symbol. The interior racks for life jackets and paddles installed. A small sign reading Elmwood Shores Boathouse, Safety First, hammered above the entrance. The structure was set to open in a weekend unveiling, where the community could witness how the children's dream overcame sabotage. Karen's sabotage ironically resulted in a publicly endorsed, unstoppable new tradition. A bright summer Saturday dawned for the Elmwood Shores Boathouse grand opening. The newly built dock shimmered under the sun. Parents and children, plus curious neighbors, gathered. Ms. Gardner and Mr. Kramer's carpentry students stood by, receiving grateful accolades. Ms. Duval stepped up to the makeshift podium, praising the spirit of unity that turned a malicious act into a communal triumph. Ethan and Rosie, each wearing the life jackets once used for their old raft, were invited to cut a symbolic ribbon stretched across the boathouse door. Cheers erupted as they snipped it. The door swung open, revealing neatly arranged plastic rafts, bright paddles, and shelves of orange life vests. Everyone applauded the safe, official gear. A few kids squealed with excitement, eager to test the new rafts under adult supervision. Ms. Duval reminded them of the strict rules. Sign in, wear a vest, remain in shallow water near the dock. Karen lingered at the perimeter. She'd come, perhaps out of curiosity or a last-ditch chance to disrupt the event. But the crowd's positive energy overshadowed her scowl. A few onlookers glared at her, recalling her sabotage. She tried to approach Ms. Duval, but the board president was busy fielding well-wishers. Realizing she had no supportive audience, Karen retreated once more, overshadowed by the joyous hum. That day, the children launched the first official raft, calling it the Sunflower, fitted for up to 3 kids at once. The water near the dock was shallow enough that parents on the platform could intervene quickly if needed. The kids paddled around, beaming. Ethan and Rosie recalled their sunken craft with a mix of sadness and pride. The homemade raft might be gone, but a grander legacy now floated in its place. A boathouse that ensured no future sabotage could rob them of the pond's simple joys. In the weeks that followed, the Elmwood Shores Boathouse thrived. Families signed up for weekend raft slots, ensuring kids had supervised time on the water. A small group of adult volunteers managed an informal schedule, issuing life jackets and helping children launch. They taught basic paddling skills and water safety. The pond, once a serene spot for strolling, now bustled with gentle activity, giggles, and the splash of oars. Even seniors occasionally hopped on the stable pedal boats for a leisurely spin under mild sunshine. Ethan and Rosie served as unofficial assistant captains, guiding younger kids. They felt a sense of ownership, remembering how their original idea spurred the entire fiasco, and how sabotage ironically led to something far bigger. They no longer mourned the lost homemade raft. The new boathouse offered them more robust crafts, communal support, and an environment free from sabotage fears. Karen, though visibly annoyed by the increased pond traffic, found no rule to object to. The HOA board had sanctioned everything. The structure's neutral color matched the guidelines. Noise levels were moderate, and the no littering, no late night rules prevented disruptions. Even the local ducks seemed unbothered by the mild boat traffic. The entire project, once ephemeral, became a deeply ingrained part of Elmwood Shore's life. Meanwhile, the local newspaper ran a follow-up piece titled From Sabotage to Celebration: Elmwood Shore's Boathouse Sales to Success. The article praised the community for transforming a hateful act into a well-managed amenity. Mention of a mystery saboteur who sank a children's raft stirred mild curiosity, but the focus was on the positive outcome. Karen, never named but strongly implied, felt further isolated. Each day she walked by the pond, the boathouse reminded her how thoroughly her plan backfired. The kids, unbothered, carried on, forging new water traditions under the big sky. As the boathouse integrated into daily life, Karen's attempts at controlling community affairs waned. She'd once wielded the bylaw binder like a sword, but the success of the boathouse overshadowed her brand of negativity. The same neighbors who once tiptoed around her criticisms now brushed them off. Ms. Duval, seeing how badly Karen's sabotage had tarnished the HOA's image, refused to indulge further demands from her. The rest of the board members, enthralled by the boathouse's success, also stepped away from Karen's rigid approach. A quietly scathing rumor circulated. The board might investigate her alleged sabotage if more evidence emerged, perhaps from camera footage or eyewitness accounts. She recognized that any further meddling with the boathouse could lead to real consequences. So, she largely retreated, focusing on minor violations like yardweed height or extra decorative items. People tolerated her less than before, ignoring most petty complaints. Carl, who used a wheelchair, found the newly built ramp from the boathouse to the water was wide enough for him to fish from. Another unintended benefit of the structure: additional accessibility. He, too, recognized the crafters overcame sabotage with a bigger, better solution. Over time, neighbors recounted how Karen's sabotage had ironically spurred them to unify. The old story of children's tears replaced by the boathouse's triumphant presence. Even the sabotage's direct victims, Ethan and Rosie, held no personal grudge, focusing on the new joys. They told friends from other neighborhoods about their community boathouse, a rare perk. Their parents saw them blossoming in confidence, no longer overshadowed by Karen's scolding or fear of sabotage. Life in Elmwood Shores turned a corner, marked by renewed camaraderie and a subtle pity for Karen, left alone in her negativity. To celebrate the boathouse's first full season, Ms. Gardner proposed a pondside festival. Volunteers set up small stalls around the water, selling homemade cookies, crafts, and local produce. The crafters from the earlier sabotage fiasco brought crocheted ornaments shaped like little rafts. A local music group played acoustic tunes near the boathouse, while kids lined up for short raft rides. The entire event felt like a relaxed fair, bridging generations and bridging once lingering tensions. Ethan, Rosie, and other children guided visitors on gentle loops around the pond, each trip supervised by a volunteer lifeguard. Parents snapped photos, beaming at the safe, well-organized fun. The festival demonstrated how a seemingly minor attraction, a boathouse, could become a beloved community hub. The sabotage, once threatening to kill kids' watery dreams, ended up spurring a new tradition of communal gatherings by the pond's edge. Karen, watching from afar, recognized she had no place in this lively festival. If she tried to scold or complain, she'd face public scorn. No official bylaw was being broken. The building was fully sanctioned, the events well managed. She retreated to her home, curtains drawn, perhaps remembering her nighttime sabotage with regret. The festival ended at dusk with a small fireworks display over the pond's reflection, a final luminous flourish capping the day. In quiet corners, older neighbors muttered that Karen's fiasco ironically made Elmwood Shores a more vibrant place. The crafters, the kids, the entire neighborhood had discovered how adversity sparks unity. Freed from the threat of her sabotage, life around the pond shimmered with possibility. If Karen's sabotage taught them anything, it was that negativity can't snuff out a determined community's flame. Despite her dwindling influence, Karen made one last attempt at reasserting her authority. She quietly campaigned for a seat on the HOA board in the upcoming election, hoping to curb unnecessary expansions like the Boathouse. She distributed flyers with buzzwords about fiscal responsibility and protecting property values, vaguely implying the Boathouse was a frivolous expense. But the Boathouse cost was mostly covered by volunteers and donations, so her claims rung hollow. When she knocked on doors seeking votes, she found most residents turned her away politely, referencing the sabotage fiasco. Some asked pointedly if she'd sunk the children's raft. She'd stammer disclaimers, citing hearsay. The distrust was palpable. On election night, Karen lost by a wide margin. A new, more neighbor-friendly candidate took the seat. Ms. Gardner, widely respected for championing the Boathouse, got an official board seat. The leadership now skewed strongly toward collaboration and positivity. Facing absolute defeat, Karen retreated further into seclusion. She rarely attended board meetings anymore. The time she appeared, she kept quiet or offered only mild commentary on trivial matters. The entire fiasco, her sabotage, the boycotted ramp fee, the unstoppable Boathouse project, had effectively ended her reign of petty terror. The community moved forward, proud of how they'd forged solidarity in the face of her negativity. A year after the Boathouse's grand opening, Elmwood Shores thrived. The once quiet pond became a modest hub of child-friendly water activity. The Boathouse staff, a rotating group of parent volunteers, ensured the rafts remained in good condition, requiring occasional repainting or minor repairs. The crafters contributed more crocheted seat covers or small bunting flags for decorations. Summer afternoons echoed with squeals of laughter from kids paddling, while older residents lounged on the Boathouse's deck, soaking in scenic views. Ethan and Rosie, now older, occasionally reminisced about their original homemade raft. They saw the Boathouse's polished rafts as a worthy successor. If Karen hadn't sabotaged them, would they have discovered the impetus for such a grand facility? Possibly not. The sabotage ironically spurred a wave of defiance and ingenuity. The next generation of kids used the Boathouse as if it had always been there, clueless that a petty act of malice once threatened simpler joys. Karen, rarely glimpsed outdoors, still lived in Elmwood Shores. Some speculated she might move eventually. Her name lingered as a cautionary tale. How a single neighbor's destructive hostility can unify others to create something far greater than the original project. The pond, shining at sunset, stood as a silent testament that negativity can be overshadowed by communal warmth. From the Boathouse deck, if one looked across the water at dusk, the reflection of the sky danced gently. Children returning their rafts in the golden glow might recall how it all started with a dream for a homemade raft, nearly destroyed by sabotage. But the final outcome soared beyond that dream. An official, beloved space for watery adventures, a living proof that kindness and collaboration can outlast one person's attempt to sink youthful hope. Life continued at Elmwood Shores, calm, yet enriched by the Boathouse. Each day, the pond rang with laughter, squeaking oars, and quiet moments of reflection. Families that had once passively followed HOA rules discovered a new communal activism, shaped by the knowledge that if anyone tried to impose malicious constraints, they could rise up in solidarity. The crafters, seniors, and youth formed bonds bridging generations. Karen's sabotage attempt had ironically paved the path for the Boathouse's success. Had she simply let the children's raft remain, it might have stayed an isolated, modest curiosity. But by sinking it, she triggered the impetus to create an official, unstoppable amenity. Over time, new residents heard only the sanitized version. Some petty sabotage led to building this Boathouse. The name Karen was rarely uttered, as the community overcame her negativity so thoroughly that she became a distant afterthought. Ethan and Rosie grew older, eventually outgrowing the small rafts, but the Boathouse remained for younger kids to discover. The intangible lesson endured. Sabotage often unites a community to produce something better. The pond, reflecting starry nights and dazzling sunsets, cradled the Boathouse in its gentle waters. Where once a hateful act sought to sink a dream, now a sturdy structure floated in defiance, welcoming each new generation to explore, paddle, and find joy in the shared realm of Elmwood Shores. Thus ended the story of how a malicious strike on a child's homemade raft led to a permanent, board-approved fixture that championed safe water play. Karen's meddling ironically fueled a wave of positivity, forging deeper neighborly bonds. In that sense, her sabotage sank only the old Rafts boards, never the spirit of the children nor the unstoppable power of a community united against cruelty.